Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ADB SEADS and Tech for Good Institute workshop, Build to Last, Shaping Micro, Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises Growth in the Digital Age. I'm Ming, Executive Director for the Tech for Good Institute. The Institute was founded by Grab just late last year to advance inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth in Southeast Asia. As its name suggests, the Institute's focus is on supporting research and conversations around how the promise of technology may be leveraged to deliver this growth. Before I begin, I would like to thank the ADB team for collaborating with us on this event, as well as our strong bench of panelists who have agreed to share their perspectives with us today, as well as you, our audience, who have taken time out of your really busy schedules for this session. Thank you very much. I really look forward to the lively exchange over the next 90 minutes. So let's begin. As countries seek to recover from the pandemic, no strategy would be complete without the attention to an important driver of all economies, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs in short. As ADB data shows, there are at least 71 million MSMEs in Southeast Asia. Many micro enterprises are not even registered as companies, but they are vital to sustaining livelihoods. And of these, some were born from necessity, others from innovation. Some will grow and scale across sectors and markets. Others will remain small, focused, and local. Not only do MSMEs account for a vast majority of businesses in Southeast Asia, they also provide significant employment and livelihood opportunities for millions across the region. MSMEs contributed to about 40% of the region's total GDP and some 19% of total export value in 2020. Their post-pandemic recovery and growth is therefore absolutely imperative for the region to build back better. Meanwhile, the digital economy is set to grow globally and across Southeast Asia. Within this digital age that is transforming the way we live, work, play, and even talk to each other like today's session, MSMEs are presented with opportunities to grow through digital transformation, with digital partners, and in the digital economy. For existing MSMEs, digitization and digitalization can help increase efficiency and even create new value. Information can be shared and accessed more easily, processes can be streamlined, routine tasks can be automated, data can inform decision-making and reveal new business opportunities. I don't think any of that is a secret. But while there are many digital tools available, adoption is uneven. Some enterprises, whether big or small, find growing through digitalization tricky, especially incumbents that have very established processes. To reap its benefits, digitalization requires mindset shifts, different skill sets, and new ways of working. We are delighted to have Maisie Angelina from the United Nations Pulse Lab, Jakarta, to share her work around understanding behavioral barriers to digitalization in the panel later. On the other hand, the pandemic has driven consumption for information services and products in and through the digital space like never before. As of 2021, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam have collectively over 400 million active internet users, and 1/10 of them only started using the internet during the pandemic. And the region is in early stages of growth. There is so much headroom. Online retail, for example, is significantly behind more mature markets like China, as you see in the slide, but mirroring its growth. So much has been written about COVID-19's catalytic role in encouraging digital participation. Last year, the Tech for Good Institute released our first study on the platform economy in Southeast Asia. We found that 1/3 of consumers using digital services only started doing so during the pandemic. And more significantly, though, 90% of them expressed that they are likely to continue. Today, half of Southeast Asia's 6 population have adopted mobile internet and digital payments. So to grow, MSMEs should be evolving in step with these digital customers. Many companies began or accelerated their digital journeys during the pandemic, but today only 1 in 5 MSMEs currently serving customers in online to offline platforms. So there is so much more room for adoption and growth. And in addition to marketing and finding customers through digital channels, MSMEs can use digital tools and platforms to diversify their supply chains, find expertise, build networks. And this bodes really well for Southeast Asia. The McKinsey Global Institute found that all Asian executives, no matter where they were sat or headquartered, indicated that increasingly Asia is trading with Asia. In fact, when the pandemic was in its first full wave in 2020, Asia's intra-regional trade remained steady despite a contraction in global trade. We will hear more about how the public sector is encouraging trade across the region in my dialogue with Chi Sia, Assistant Chief Executive at Singapore's IMDA International, an agency supporting the infocom and media sectors in the next session. Digital solutions can also overcome long-standing barriers to growth faced by some MSMEs. Access to finance is one such example. Some micro and small businesses have traditionally had trouble getting formal loans if they did not have formal registration, financial records, or conclusive credit histories. Digital financial service providers are now offering solutions to this need. Using scalable digital channels, they can lower costs, serve customers more efficiently. They use alternative sources of data to develop credit risk models that reflect the nature of MSMEs, and they are able to offer microfinancing products that meet the needs of these businesses. In our research, we found that 3/4 of MSMEs with loans from such digital providers had previously been unable to secure financing from banks and other more traditional lenders. In the industry panel later in the workshop, Kel J from Grab Financial Group will share how FinTech is partnering with MSMEs to support their growth aspirations. So far, we focused on how MSMEs may transform for the digital age through the adoption of solutions and tools and with their customers and partners. But let me draw attention to a slightly different angle, the growth of digitally native MSMEs that will shape our region's economy for the future. Today, it is easier than ever to start up a new business. New entrepreneurs can use digital platforms and solutions to create prototypes, validate a business proposition, and reach their first set of customers. COVID-19 saw an uptick in entrepreneurship and inspired many digital-first business models. As Agner from Amazon Web Services, AWS, will share in the industry panel later, digital platforms have allowed so many entrepreneurs to act on and scale their ideas, their teams, their portfolios, and their markets. But it is not only the large global companies like AWS that are shaping the way forward. Being close to customers is always an advantage. Local tech firms across the region have identified needs and gaps in the market, developing context-sensitive products and services. How may we support these companies to grow and scale? We are delighted to have Lynn, CEO of Logivan, to share her experience of digitalizing the local trucking industry in Vietnam later in the panel. Notwithstanding the great potential for MSMEs in the digital age, we must also pay careful attention to the risks of this trajectory. Unlocking the promise of the digital economy requires us to be mindful that no one should be left behind. While the pandemic catalyzed rapid digital transformation across businesses, governments, and societies, we are a long way from full participation in the digital economy. I mentioned earlier that 1 in 2 customers have adopted mobile internet and digital payments, but only 1 in 5 in the MSME segment are on digital platforms. Digital access is still uneven. Some 30% of the population across the region still does not have reliable access to the internet, especially in the more rural areas. And segments of populations from minorities to the elderly also face challenges in accessing and adopting digital technologies. And there are gaps across small and larger businesses incumbents, and younger businesses. Talent is in short supply, and companies need to invest in new areas like cybersecurity and data governance. So these challenges mean that the benefits of a digitally driven post-pandemic recovery will remain unequally distributed unless we are really mindful of working together to enable all MSMEs to thrive. So this is so urgent and important, and even more so today. The disruptions of COVID-19 and the global tech advancements will not taper off, even as we turn the corner on this pandemic. The pace of change is likely to speed up, and we want MSMEs to build to last for the long term. So we need flexible and innovative approaches to solving problems. Open and early conversations and collaboration between governments, the private sector, and civil society, such as what we're doing today, are much needed if policies and frameworks are to successfully balance the opportunities and inherent risks of innovation. Regional coordination is also vital. As a market, Southeast Asia holds so much promise. Even the largest countries by themselves are not large enough to compete globally, but as a region as a whole, we are powerful in our depth and our diversity. Many issues underlying the digital economy, like digital flows and cybersecurity, moreover, are transnational in nature and therefore will require transnational efforts to address. This big challenge requires collective effort, and each of us holds a part of the puzzle in Southeast Asia. And so we come together to enable the region to grow and thrive. I'm therefore delighted to have you, our audience, our attendees, and our speakers join us today. And I look forward to the following conversations on how we may support MSMEs to grow through, with, and in the digital economy in Southeast Asia in a manner that is sustainable, equitable, and inclusive. Thank you so much, and I will now pass the time over to Sabine Spohn, Principal Investment Specialist of ADB, who will touch on some of the themes I've covered, but through the lens of the bank. Thank you again. Sabine, please. Sabine, I think you're muted.
Yes, I do the same thing over again. So sorry for that. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and join this very interesting discussion today. It's actually a topic that is very close to ADB's heart, and it's a core focus of what we do through our sovereign and private sector operations in our developing member countries. And the support, as Ming has mentioned, is even more crucial now in the pandemic times, as we have seen. The topic itself, digitalization and SMEs, is very close to my heart, maybe also with a slight twist in it, because my current work focuses on women and women SMEs in particular. ADB has recently launched, therefore, a new initiative that focuses on access to finance to women and women SMEs through innovative solution. And digitalization, of course, is here a key part, not just for businesses, but also for financial institutions. As Ming mentioned already, the technology can help to tackle the financial inclusion challenges that many of those businesses have, and they need, as we all know, credit to grow and have some buffer in terms of market disruptions. The pandemic has also reinforced or accelerated, actually, as we've seen, the need for digitalization and a digital ecosystem, where actually we need all stakeholders to be more digital going forward. And we have seen this with the emergence of the fintechs, the e-commerce platforms, but also with the small little SMEs that was trying to find new ways to sell their produce during the country lockdowns, like just putting it up on Facebook and things like that. So there's a lot to do, and I think the verdict is still out there. What's the best way, the most inputful, who ultimately has the best results? Before I continue, I just wanted to highlight also some figures here, because I think we still have this challenge that everyone, I think, agrees on the need that we need to do more in this space. But when you look at it, 80% of women SMEs who have credit needs, altogether was 60 that Min mentioned, are either underserved or unserved in total, and that leads to a 1.7 trillion financing gap still existing. During the pandemic, or the first research that came out of it, have also seen that 80% of women's businesses actually had to slow down, close their business, or have really challenges to find ways to sustain in the new normal environment. And just that those challenges, of course, come also with opportunities. As Ming also mentioned already, we have a big market there that we could actually achieve. It's estimated that the Internet of Things markets reach by 2028 about $1.8 trillion. And that just digital financial services could contribute to 95 million of new jobs and give a GDP boost by 2025 already of about 3.7 trillion. So the opportunities are there. And I guess what we want to talk about today also is how we can help to achieve that. Before I close, I just thought to give a few examples that ADB also is working on, trying to support innovation in the digitalization efforts of many. So we work with one bank in Papua New Guinea, for example. Through a hackathon, we identified a mobile solution to record online business transactions for SMEs that could be linked to a credit scoring in the bank. And so they could easier, faster and more efficient and more inclusive become a loan. Now, I think the important part of this, and Min has highlighted that as well, we leapfrog a lot of times SMEs into digital spaces, and we should not forget that it doesn't come natural for many to suddenly operate on a digital platform, and we need therefore also support SMEs in terms of training, capacity building on digital financial services, on how to do e-commerce, and so forth. I think that's a big part of the equation as well. In the Philippines, just one example, Cantalan Bank is the first rural bank that has moved its operation into the cloud. And Typhoon Rai, when that hit in December last year, actually they were the only bank in this region that could operate after a few days and facilitated that SMEs could go and get cash and receive remittances through a transaction app, because that's very important, especially during such a crisis time. And then lastly, a pilot in Indonesia, which is actually a stakeholder alliance. And I think that's the beauty of it, because we all need to have collaborative efforts to achieve that. That helps to digitalize the supply chains, connecting small vendors with wholesalers, helping them to digitalize their payment procurement systems. And so all a step into the right direction. And I will stop here, and I look very much forward to listen to the interesting discussions today. And I thank you very much, and back to Ming, please.
Thank you so much, Sabine. And those are great, not just ideas and solutions, but thank you for also sharing the actual impact that they've already had. So thank you so much. For the next segment of this workshop, I'm delighted to welcome Fu Chi Xia, the Assistant Chief Executive of the Infocom Media and Development Authority of Singapore. Hi, Chi Xia. Chi Xia oversees the agency's international strategy, engagement, and collaboration efforts. Her experience as a career diplomat is invaluable in this role. Prior to joining IMDA, Chi Xia was Singapore's High Commissioner to the UK and concurrently Ambassador to Ireland and Iceland. For those of you who are tuning in, this is just a public service announcement. There is a reminder that you may send in your questions to Chisia during the session via the link that is provided. So Chisia, hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Good to see you, Ming, and I'm happy to see the audiences who are joining us in this workshop.
Thank you so much. And, whilst I know that you're working for Singapore's IMDA, I know that you're doing a lot of work and a lot of thinking about how we can support and provide a thriving environment for MSMEs across Southeast Asia. So perhaps for a start, and for those who may not be so familiar with the work of IMDA, could you maybe briefly share your team's mandate within the Singapore government?
Sure. The IMDA stands for the Infocom Media Development Authority. And as the name suggests, we are both the regulator as well as the developer of what we feel is the converged Infocom as well as media sectors. So what we really do is to look at both what we call the vertical of the sector, Infocom and media, in either the regulation or providing the support for the ecosystem, whether in terms of putting in place the infrastructure, the talent, and other necessary supports for these two sectors. And as we spoke about earlier, that the Infocom media and digitalization is such a global process. So as we look at it domestically, clearly we look at it in terms of how we are able to expand the opportunities across different markets, starting, of course, in Southeast Asia, but really given how we are able to connect to Sabine in Germany and our colleagues in the US, the opportunities in many ways are boundless. But the other mandate, which is also important to emphasize, is that both as a developer and regulator, we are also looking at the social sector in terms of the digital divide that we spoke a lot about. That ultimately, even as we look at the upside, we need to look at how to build a digitally cohesive society, how to ensure that our people are empowered to maximize the opportunities, but to address the downside risks as well. So that's really what IMDA does. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And you're so right about the vertical as well as the horizontal. And I'm sure that IMDA has, seen a lot of it, especially in the last 2 years, with COVID-19 and seeing so many businesses come on board and also understanding what the gaps are for those, whether it's businesses or individuals who are unable to get on board, what that actually means. But it does look like we're hopefully, fingers crossed, turning the page on COVID-19. So from your point of view, what are some of the key observations that have changed the way IMDA is approaching support for enterprises, or maybe reinforced some initial assumptions and which is sort of encouraging you to double down? So, what has changed and, what has sort of said, okay, we will write in our initial hunches and we're going to double down?
Well, I think we have always looked at the MSME sector as a very important part of our economy. You mentioned the ASEAN figures, and even in Singapore, 2/3 of our employees are from the SME sector, and it contributes almost half of our GDP, which is actually higher, interestingly, than the rest of Southeast Asia. So even before the pandemic, a lot of resources were devoted to ensuring that our SMEs could ride the wave of digitalization. And so we have this program called SMEs Go Digital, which essentially is a curated suite of digital solutions, whether how you run your operations in terms of your HR, your accounting, how do you reach out to your consumers and your suppliers, so in terms of e-payment and e-invoicing. How do you reach out to a larger market in terms of platforms and other access to your consumers? So this sometimes could be quite daunting for certain SMEs in deciding, again, as you mentioned, cybersecurity packages, what is the data governance framework? And what we do is to curate a trusted source of such solutions for SMEs to be able to pick up from. The second set of work that we try to do is that large companies could have the resources to devote to some of these technological solutions. It's much harder for SMEs to do so. And what we have started is a kind of CTO as a service. And if you have a particular business plan, you need additional support. Our SME center would be able to provide dedicated services in a more aggregated way to different SMEs in specific industries. So rather than recruit your own CTO, you're able to tap into a collective CTO that we provide. And this have all started before the pandemic, of course. But as a result of the pandemic, you see a huge acceleration of the adoption of some of these digital solutions. So much so that kind of 8 out of 10 SMEs at this point in time have adopted digital solutions. And you see both, as you mentioned, kind of incumbent services coping with the pandemic through digitalization, but through that process, discovering that there is actually an additional market that is beyond their immediate geography or the immediate clientele that they used to service. And the flip side of it is that there's a huge acceleration of new businesses that is completely digital, and in some instances, as they are incorporated, including micro businesses, instantaneously global as well. So we really see the acceleration of both existing businesses going digital, but also acceleration of new businesses that are born digital and hopefully born global as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I guess the reality is that going digital is not something you do, right? It's just a journey that just keeps going, and it's just an ongoing evolution all the time. Giselle, maybe we can zoom out a little bit. And you in particular, your portfolio is really the international collaboration. So if we talk about the region, how is what's happening in Singapore either align or depart from what's happening with other ASEAN member states, other countries in Southeast Asia, in terms of the strategies in supporting MSMEs?
Well, I would like to think that quite apart from the fact that we don't have a rural population, unlike much larger ASEAN countries, our strategies are completely aligned with the rest of the region. And in fact, a lot of our attention, particularly in our international work, is devoted to finding that convergence within the Southeast Asian market. I would broadly put that in two ways. One is something that we spoke a lot about, which is digital inclusion. And how do you build out both in terms of your consumer base, of basic digital literacy and access, as well as the capability for businesses as they embark on this digital journey, including reaching out potentially to a wider Southeast Asian market, no longer limited, as I said, to their immediate geographical boundaries, but across national and cross ASEAN. So a large part of our work really goes into capacity building. How do you train out even government officials in understanding the regulatory framework which supports some of these digitalization processes? The second part of which are some of these fundamental processes that overcomes the obstacle of transboundary interactions. So whether it's about cross-border data flows, whether it's about what we call basic digital utilities. So from digital identity to e-invoicing, to e-payment, to accessing larger platforms and marketplaces digitally. Some of the digital utilities that we are trying to put in place, such that even as SMEs, you don't have to navigate what is still a slightly fragmented regulatory and legislative landscape, such that it's easy for you to pick up what you need to do and be able to transact regionally as well. So those are the two big buckets, I would say, that we are working closely with ASEAN on.
Thank you. And, I love the way that you sort of, there are some strategies that need to be aligned, and then there's some strategies that need more alignment. You actually need the cooperation, right? And so perhaps I can ask you, where is cooperation most needed from your perspective to be able to support this regional growth for Southeast Asia?
So one of the very basic, I would say, ingredient of a digital economy is really data. Whether you are collecting consumer data in order to develop consumer insights, it could be also in terms of the kind of products that you're able to provide as you expand overseas. You might have employees, across different countries as well. What is your HR policy that is more regional rather than domestic? So data really is one of the foundation of the digital economy. And at this point in time, we have different levels of data protection across Southeast Asia, some with much more developed data protection laws, some in the process of doing so, and others who are still dependent on kind of sectoral protection. And we fully recognize that ASEAN will always be a very diverse region. Quite often I would like to see it as a source of strength. That diversity actually provides kind of different value chain that can be done in different parts of Southeast Asia. So what we are trying to do is not a strict convergence of everybody needs to comply with the same standards. But what we are trying to do is to really provide very easy solutions, in particular for MSMEs, in order to have data flows across boundaries. So for example, what we have done is to develop, of course, with very close partnership with our ASEAN partners, ASEAN Data Management Framework, which is really a very simple toolkit that any small companies to pick up to understand what you need to do in order to provide the right level of data protection, what's the governance framework, without having to navigate different levels of protection and different kinds of regulation in each country. We have created what we call a model contractual clause that companies can then just pick up and use without having a big legal team, having to negotiate every single contract as well. So these are really simple toolkits that we think will be helpful across Southeast Asia without a very large harmonization effort, and yet very simple and easy to use for MSMEs as well.
No, that's really great, and I love your point about diversity. Chisia, the numbers are big, and people like to throw them around, especially when we're looking at attracting investment to the region. Right, 660 million people, 525 million internet users by 2025. $1 trillion digital economy by 2030. These are the big projections out there. But at the end of the day, we want Southeast Asia to be more than a market, right? How do we create opportunities for MSMEs from across Southeast Asia to not just be the market, but to be able to grow and tap onto the market, be the innovators and the producers within this market?
Yeah, I think it's really always a combination of what is local and specific to each market. And yet there's a certain level of coordination across the region. And I think we really need to find that kind of value add of each individual ASEAN country that in a country, say in Cambodia, is able to develop certain specific specific products that might cater to Cambodia, but at the same time is able to translate to the rest of Southeast Asia. So it's not really just the larger economies like Indonesia or is slightly more developed economies like Singapore that benefit from the digital economy, but every country in Southeast Asia has a role to play in the entire value chain, including digitally. And so one of the things that we have been getting very strong support for, of course, from the ASEAN leaders in terms of the ASEAN digital master plans that we have been putting in place, is really what are the concrete things that all of us can do collectively. We all understand about the need for digital transformation, but what are some of the foundations in order to do that? Spoke a little bit about digital literacy, the training, the access, but also what can we do regionally? And the ASEAN Economic Community is often seen as one that you allow for the free flow of goods, services, capital, and skilled labor. And I think one of our aspirations is that you are going to build what is also ASEAN digital economy, which also allows for the free flow of data as well that really powers this digital economy.
Yeah, I mean, and you shared a little bit about the data management framework and the model contractual clauses for cross-border data flows. So can I ask you, where has cooperation been really, really fruitful, and what are the ones which where is cooperation you think really most urgently needed as governments sort of take a slightly more medium-term view? I think a lot of governments have been so seized with the here and now with the pandemic over the last 2 years, as they start to build out the sort of from the immediate term to maybe to the near to short term, near to medium term. What are some of the areas that you think are most urgently needed?
I think one of the challenge obviously of working with SMSEs is about awareness. So while we have created some of these utilities, we have created some of these frameworks and toolkits, sending the message out to individual SMEs to allow them to be able to use the model contractual clauses, the guidelines that we have created, is quite often one of the challenges. There are many different languages, many different regions across Southeast Asia. How do you translate what we have done into indigenous languages, creating that awareness so that the toolkits are available, but people need to know about it to be able to understand it in their own languages and then be able to use them. And so that's something that we are working with individual Southeast Asian countries in terms of their SMEs association. How do you translate some of what we have done into indigenous languages and spreading the word as well? And I think one of the hopefully outcome of today's workshop is that more become aware of this, and we find additional partners, including from those present, in order to propagate some of the work that we have already done.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's the old adage, right? That innovation is adoption, right? Unless it's actually adopted and actually people using it, it just remains a good idea as opposed to real action. So that's so right. Chisia, a little while ago, you mentioned Singapore is slightly anomalous in Southeast Asia. We're really, really small. We don't have a rural population. So can I just ask a little bit, from IMDA and Singapore, IMDA's perspective, how is Singapore thinking about its role within ASEAN to support the MSME agenda for the whole region, segment to segment, micro, small to scale, medium? What can we bring to the table? What can Singapore bring to the table?
I think what Singapore can bring to the table are probably two things. One is that whole regional integration effort that we have been supporting. And quite often, in order to do that, some of our counterparts, our governmental counterparts, our regulatory counterparts, might not even have been able to fully appreciate the evolution of some of this technology and in deciding how best for them to regulate. So quite a lot of our conversation is drawing some of these best practices from across the world. And we do work with extra regional partners, whether they are the Japanese, the Americans, the Koreans, and others, to bring them to help have that conversation with government and regulators on what are we supporting and what are we regulating in the first place. So quite a lot of, as I mentioned before, capacity building type of work in order to do work that supports your MSMEs. And the second layer of work would be really going down to the brass tacks. As I mentioned, quite a lot of what we do is curating a set of digital solutions that is easy to use. And I think some of the work that we have done including in cybersecurity solutions. And because as we move more and more to the digital sphere, the concerns, of course, is about scams and cybersecurity attacks and others. And that is something that we have also put in place, including having a very active network of regional collaboration on cybersecurity, but also capacity building, as I mentioned as well, so that everybody is kind of brought up to speed on what needs to be done. When something happens, we have a very quick way of exchanging information and responding to them as well. And hopefully that will really help create the trust and the conviction that digital actually brings much more opportunities than the potential downside.
No, absolutely. And I think that information exchange is so important, right? So thank you so much. Can I ask you, you've obviously, the countries conversing with one another and working together have done so much work, and clearly every government in Southeast Asia recognizes the importance of getting this right. Can I ask from your perspective, where are the challenges? Where are not deepest, but where are the knobbiest challenges? Where do they lie? And where are the areas that you really feel we do have some way to go in really fostering greater cooperation, but that it's sort of so important that we really have to get this right? So where are the key challenges where we do have some heavy lifting to go?
So I spoke a little bit about the kind of basic contractual clauses that we have worked on to enable the cross-border flow of data. As many countries look at data protection, I think sometimes there is a certain kind of convergence or divergence in terms of how they ought to be protected. I think we should raise the standards in terms of data protection. But sometimes other considerations come into the picture in terms of a certain level of protectionism, a certain level of confusion between what is security and what is needed for business flows as well as for innovation. And I think that's some of the clarifications that it would be useful to look into, and a certain level of kind of public-private and people partnership that you spoke about, to develop the actual use cases to demonstrate that we can allow for a certain level of exchange and innovation without impinging on sovereignty or security, would, I think, educate all of us in the iterative process that you spoke about in policy development. So I think that's probably some work that we need to do. We have, as Singapore talked about, kind of regulatory sandboxes to try out some of these things. And quite often, as technology moves very quickly, the best way to do so is really to prove by actually doing it. And I think we are looking forward to opportunities to work with the private sector and others to find those regulatory sandboxes to try out.
I think that's so important, those use cases, because I think one of the things, the challenges between sort of protecting and locking up everything in a box as opposed to sort of freely being able to share, there's always that worry, because we have seen use cases where the value or the ways in which data can be used were not immediately clear from the beginning, right? And so you having those sandboxes or having those use cases and getting people comfortable about not just sharing, but doing it in a safe and responsible way is so important. Can I ask you, maybe as a final question, what are you most optimistic about with regards to the outlook for MSMEs in Southeast Asia?
Well, I think there is a certain conviction as a result of the pandemic that many countries have, or many MSMEs have adopted digital solutions. You spoke about the stickiness of both in terms of entrepreneurs as well as consumers in adopting these digital solutions. There is still a relatively high level of trust that this has brought positivity to our entire experience. I think those are some of the kind of precious things that we need to preserve. And there are a lot of upside opportunities in a population that is generally very receptive to digitalization. So in that sense, you have a market and a consumer base that is receptive. And these provides the huge opportunities for MSMEs to ride on. But the most important thing I think we need to preserve is the trust and the benefits of the system, so that we can conserve what we have been trying to build in our digitalization efforts.
Yeah, thank you so much. And as Sabine had mentioned in her talk before also, is that there are populations in Southeast Asia which are really leapfrogging technologies. And that's sort of really sort of the benefits of that were really borne out during the pandemic. Thank you, Chi Xia. Thank you so much for the wonderful chat and for sharing your time as well as your insights with us. And for everyone who is tuning in and from so many different countries, as I can say. I've personally learned a huge amount, and I hope it's been equally enriching for all of those who are tuning in at the moment. Let me now pass over the time to Ilaria Chan, the Tech for Good Institute's chairperson, for the next segment. Ilaria, over to you. Thank you, Chi Xia. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ming. Sabine and Chi Xia, valuable insights. I learned so much. Thinking just even about these staggering stats, right? MSME accounting for 97% of all businesses in the ASEAN region, employing 67% of the working population. They truly are the backbone of our economies here in Southeast Asia, and we stand on their shoulders. So let's continue to dig deeper into the local and regional level insights from the viewpoint of our distinguished group of panelists who represent very diverse viewpoints. Allow me to introduce them to you today. So first we have Agna Mukuskaite. Agna is a regulatory lawyer and a public policy expert, having worked in the communications regulatory policy field for more than 16 years. Currently, she is the APAC public policy lead for regulated industries for Amazon Web Services. And she focuses on cloud computing policy, including data sovereignty, cybersecurity, data privacy, and related policy issues for telecommunications, financial services, healthcare, and other regulated industries. And before joining AWS, Agna worked as the APAC Senior Regulatory Manager for Vodafone Business and have extensive experiences across different continents like Europe, Middle East, and now in the APAC region. Next, we have Lynn Farm. Lynn founded Logifan in 2017 as an Uber for trucks to disrupt Vietnam's $25 billion trucking industry. Now, its truck hailing platform enables real-time tracking and connects shippers directly to the drivers, reducing the empty return rate and boosting income for the independent drivers. And before founding Logifan, Lynn was a tech analyst for Goldman Sachs in London, and she worked for a manufacturing business with 10 trucks. In 2018, Lynn won the Founder of the Year at the ASEAN Rice Bowl Awards and now included in Forbes Vietnam and Forbes Asia 30 Under 30. Next, we have Lim Kal-jae. Kal-jae is currently the head of Grab Financial Group's fintech arm, where he oversees the regional payments, rewards, lending, insurance, and wealth management businesses. Prior to this, Kal-jae has assumed many different leadership roles at Grab, such as regional head of operations, co-chief of staff to CEO, head of Singapore, the list goes on. And as the first country head of Grab Singapore, Kal-jae helped launch Grab in this market and led the business in its first 6 years. Finally, we have Macy Angelina. Macy is the social systems lead for United Nations Pulse Lab, Jakarta, and she has over 10 years of experience in international development, working with programs addressing gender inequalities and social development through participatory design and evidence-based policy making. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for spending this time with us. Lots to go into, so we will not waste any minute. Let's start with Agna, and when you all start speaking, please do spend a minute to quickly educate us a bit on what you do and what does your organization do as well. So Agna, let's start with you. fresh off the conversation just now with Chixia, we have listened to key observations on the MSME sector and the areas where greater cooperation across ASEAN can better support them, the ecosystem, to help them shift towards digital. Where, in your opinion, are the windows of opportunities for the tech sector to contribute? And maybe you can share some case studies from the ground based on the extensive work that AWS has done in the recent years. So over to you, Agna.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, for a really kind introduction and for the opportunity to be part of this conversation today. I represent Amazon Web Services, the cloud computing company in the region. I work in the public policy sector, sort of working with a lot of different regulators and policymakers, helping them understand cloud technology and also shape the policies that impact digital transformation and cloud adoption in the region. And my background, as I mentioned, is that in the telecommunications, which is a very heavily regulated industry. And now I'm working with all the other heavily regulated industries, such as financial services and healthcare and energy. And these are all industries that are extremely successful in benefiting from cloud adoption, but also are extremely heavily regulated. And the policymakers and regulators in these verticals are really looking very closely when that transition to the cloud happens to make sure that the data is protected, that there are cybersecurity controls in place and then similar requirements. So it's absolutely fascinating to be working in this region and with these really complex industries. And from the SME perspective, really we have seen amazing digital transformation happening in our region. And because I work in all these heavily regulated industries, it has been fascinating to see that happen even in these industries. So of course, it's much easier to see that transformation happen and migration to cloud happening in industries that are less regulated. I would say we've seen a lot of retailers move to the cloud, startups, education companies, food and beverage, hospitality, and other industries. But even industries that I mentioned that are heavily regulated, even they are really successfully migrating to the cloud as and when policies really clarify and allow for that to happen. And really what cloud has allowed and enabled to do is basically it enabled the delivery of IT resources for these micro, small and medium entities over the internet and allowed such companies to be way more cost effective, way more flexible and scale as needed, and also to ensure a much better security levels for their data. And really, if we look at the success of these MSMEs in the region, in the past, ability to use such IT resources was really available more to the large enterprises. And that situation has changed, right? In the last 10 years with public cloud computing, with hyperscalers, it really has changed. And now it's available for really small and medium and micro companies. It really has changed that, on-premises IT infrastructure that was so expensive to maintain in the past. And cloud has driven that productivity, growth, innovation, and it's not just compute and data storage, it's also capabilities such as data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or Internet of Things services, which have enabled really amazing innovation to happen. And we have seen that definitely further being advanced by COVID-19 pandemic, which triggered unprecedented reliance on technology and data services. And we, in particular, I wanted to mention the healthcare industry that I work with quite a lot, which was really amazing to see how healthcare organizations during pandemic try to ensure continuity of services, also safeguard the citizens' health and well-being. Apologies. and also to strengthen the resilience of the healthcare systems. And that happened with the help of cloud. And here I wanted to mention a few case studies. So for example, one of our customers, Dr. Anywhere in Singapore, they now operate not just in Singapore, but also in Vietnam and Thailand. And they basically provide, this is an app that provide an ability for patients to have video conference calls with their doctors on demand, receive the medical advice, but also get then the medication delivered to their home. Right now, even the medical certificate can be acquired through the app, right? And Dr. Anywhere actually is operating fully on the cloud. It's a digitally native company, and they have seen increase in usage since the start of pandemic by probably 3 or 4-fold. Very similar application operating in Thailand, Dr. Raksa, again, connecting patients and doctors and pharmacies. So it's absolutely fascinating to see that transformation. Briefly, I wanted to mention the financial inclusion as well, which is another sector we work with. So we have seen really amazing digitally transformative companies that are focusing on mostly on payments and lending. And I know some of the speakers mentioned lending. So I wanted to mention, because basically these are the digitally native companies that facilitate financial inclusion for ASEAN populations, so which are underbanked or unbanked completely, right? So like, for example, if you have our customers like Click in Cambodia, which offers a payments-based service, and they work with National Bank of Cambodia to develop the eKYC opportunities, specifically targeting the underbanked Cambodians. Or Amarta, which is a peer-to-peer lending company, which basically targets, focuses on financial services to small and micro businesses, targeting working age mothers with dependents. And really, it's been amazing to see how they've been using cloud services and data analytics to identify, for example, the potential non-performing loans. So these are just a few examples of capabilities that are operating in the cloud environment, allowing the digital transformation to happen.
I love that. It's all the examples you have mentioned is basically making something that previously was had very high barriers to entry to being now very equitable. And you've mentioned the underbanked, you've mentioned moms, you've mentioned micro businesses. I mean, these are really the more vulnerable population that it's being able to help. So thank you so much for sharing that. And by the way, don't worry, Agna, my puppy's always wreaking havoc at the background. We all have that. Why don't we move on to Lynn? Lynn, so we're all aware of the fact that Southeast Asia is a very diverse region. One market's realities can differ really significantly from another. So Lojifan, actually, you guys connect truckers with sellers, and you guys are on a mission to reduce transport costs for MSMEs. As someone really at the forefront in the nit-grit of serving the needs of MSMEs in Vietnam, can you share a bit about what exactly is the problem that your team is solving on the ground every day? And what are some interesting insights that you've gained about the local MSME landscape that all of us can really learn from?
Sure, Ilaria. So right now we are the largest truck matching platform in Vietnam, and we are at the forefront of enabling individual drivers, truck drivers, and SME trucking companies to have better access to business opportunity. So as you might know or might not know before, over 90% of trucking companies in Vietnam have less than 5 trucks. And so with an extremely fragmented market like that, there exists a lot of brokers in the marketplace to leverage, to take advantage of the information asymmetry so that they can brokers between cargo shipments and truck drivers. And the micro truckers, the SME truckers, they don't have access to all of this order information themselves. Thus, they have to rely on a very small number of brokers to get them new shipments, new business. And the matching process is typically done through multiple layers of brokers as well by manual calling. which are also hard to verify the reliable brokers and also who are the reliable truck drivers. And so this process leads to a huge inefficiency in the market, where over 70% of truck returns are empty. And this also leads to a very high logistic cost in Vietnam, which is roughly 21% of our national GDP, compared to 15% in China, for example, or 8% in Singapore. So one of the key insights that we have learned that we think that would be very interesting to share here today with the audience is that the truckers can be quite reluctant to work with new brokers, new clients, due to the fear of fraud or payment defaults. So it actually happened quite often that a shady broker makes use of the information asymmetry in the marketplace, that nobody knows who he is, he has this shipment, and there's also the lack of standardization in the market. So they use this information asymmetry to defraud truckers. And thus it is extremely important for the truckers to build trust, to have a solid connection, solid circle for him to get more businesses and for them to grow their business and buy more trucks. And in this digital transformation era that we are in right now, those truckers, those that can leverage the digital tools and platforms to get more business opportunity, to get more jobs, orders, and shipments, the more successful they will become in the long run. And so we really want to encourage the digital inclusion for the small individual truckers and the SMEs trucking companies in Vietnam.
That's wonderful. I did not know that there are all these shady brokers. So do you feel like technology platform and data and the services you guys provide can really significantly cut actually these middlemen so that you can provide transparency? How far away are we from that ideal scenario where perfect information, trustworthy information can be accessed by the trucking community?
Yes, so data and scale are very important in building the kind of standardization and authority kind of body to enable systematic ratings of truckers and systematic ratings of brokers and shippers as well, whether they pay on time or whether their cargo information is exactly what they said it is, or is it like some really tough cargo shipment request and turns out it's very different from what the trucker originally thought. So the systematic data collection and also building trust of this systematic authority tech player can really help the industry moving forward.
No, thank you so much for that insight. Okay, why don't we move on quickly to Kel-J and Macy, and then we'll circle back because there's so many interesting points. Kel-J, we previously, heard Agno actually talk about the importance also of financial inclusion, and obviously you overlook a lot of the verticals that are, some of them pretty new, but really targeting and helping the masses in Southeast Asia. So we talked about the fragility of MSMEs highlighted by Ming and our previous speakers, the compounding needs that come with it, and also sometimes the inability for MSMEs to withstand the shocks of the economy and to bounce back fast. So you have a lot of direct access to a lot of micro merchants on the platform. How true do you see such realities on the ground? And how is Grab Financial Group right now tapping on innovations in digital finance to really help support these micro merchants?
Sure, thanks, Ilaria. Firstly, I noticed that I'm the thorn among the roses, so thanks for having me for this panel. I've been really privileged to have been part of the Grab journey for the last 8 years across all the verticals, and most importantly, serving the almost 30 million users that we have across the region. The verticals that we operate in, so the mobilities, deliveries, financial services. So financial services is the newer one that we've launched. And just to share, financial services is split into two parts. There's the fintech part, and then there's the digital bank. So I lead the fintech arm of what we call GFG, or Grab Financial Group. which consists of lending, insurance, wealth, payments, and rewards. Let me just double click on that a little bit, right? Before getting to your question, a little bit of how sort of GFG was born. We didn't just wake up one day and with a grand vision of GFG. It really started with GrabPay, which is our payments product, and it wasn't for payments specifically, but it was for making the our mobility experience for our customer a lot more seamless, so that you don't have to deal with, as a customer, you don't have to deal with change. You can jump into a car and jump out. And also it's safer, right, for both the drivers and the passenger. Now, what we've seen is that the adoption of cashless with GrabPay was actually quite fast. And then we also then realized that, hey, why not also enable GrabPay to pay for stuff outside of the platform, of the Grab platform. And that's where GrabPay as an e-wallet was born, and this was around 2015, 2016. Around the same time, we also realized that a lot of our driver partners and delivery partners, they were very underserved by the traditional financial institutions. Also, some of the small merchants that we serve, and this because of the income. The income is not very consistent, not very stable, and therefore they are deemed to be too risky to be served. And so we saw an opportunity there, a gap and a need that we had to address. In fact, we saw it more like it's our responsibility to serve this group of customers, and we're well positioned to serve as well, because we have access to their income data. We know that majority of them are good paymasters. It's just that because of the traditional restrictions, they're not able to access simple things like loans. And so in 2018, we launched Grab Financial Group. And then more recently, this year, we'll be launching our first digital bank in Singapore. Now, going back to your question, Ilaria, about the realities on the ground, it is very, very true. Especially in the last 2 years with COVID, right? I'll give you an example with in the F&B sector. So we serve a lot of F&B merchants because of Grab Food, and they were particularly badly hit because obviously their customers are not allowed to dine in at their restaurants, and therefore they face a huge impact to their cash flows. So much so that they're not able to stock up their ingredients to make sales, to prepare for the next day, and that kind of cause a negative spiral. Now we help these merchants obviously with Grab Food, so bringing them online. But beyond that, we also launch a simple product called Merchant Cash Advance in Thailand. And as a merchant, I'm able to apply for a loan via the Grab Merchant app, all online. It gets approved immediately. The loans get dispersed to my bank account within hours, and I get to then pay down on the loan daily through deductions from the sales that I make, and all this without having to do any submit lots of paperwork. And we were able to do this because obviously they're already a merchant on Grab Food, and therefore we were able to use the data to assess the creditworthiness of these merchants. And I have to say, this has been one of the more successful products that we've launched. Also very well loved by our merchants. In fact, we have some merchants who shared with us that beyond just stocking up their ingredients for the next day, and making sure that they have enough ingredients to make sales the next day, they were able to expand their business as well during this time in preparation for the recovery. So taking a step back, majority of about 60% of our loans, the loans that we issued, are to these small merchants and helping them to tide through during this difficult time. I'll give another example, and this is more of a non-F&B merchant. So similarly, even the non-F&B sector will face similar challenges, and they had to pivot quite fast. They had to pivot online. And how Grab has helped is to help these merchants activate cashless online payments with GrabPay. More recently with Pay Later as well. How Pay Later has helped them is that it actually unlocks a new segment of users that these merchants won't otherwise typically be able to access. It also increases the basket size, it increases the conversion rates, and ultimately it drives more sale to their online business. And so it's not uncommon for these merchants who have activated, who has gone online and activated online payments to share that, ever since doing that, their online business has grown significantly. It's sometimes even beyond pre-pandemic. And then we see this as well, just from our Pay Later business growing quite substantially in 2021. So here, these are just two of many examples that we have seen on the ground.
I really love, thank you, Kaljay, the creative ways actually that you guys have come up with using credit proxies because of the high frequency use case you have. Especially shocked that you're allowing daily pay down for loans to be approved within hours. I don't even know if all the big banks do that with their high net worth clients. So I just wonder, how has it been successful in terms of making sure you keep the non-performing loans low? Like, do you see this method of credit proxy actually working pretty well?
Yeah, I think surprisingly, well, maybe I shouldn't say surprisingly, but a lot of effort was put into assessing the creditworthiness of these businesses. You're right. So the more traditional FIs and the banks would shy away from such businesses, but because they are merchants already on our platform, and we do have access to that income data that they have. So it does help with building the right credit models and assessing that they are credit worthy, and therefore we are able to manage our NPLs.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you so much, Kaljay. Let's move on to Macy. So we're now we've heard from regulatory law, public policy angle. We've heard from founders with logistics. We've heard from operating in fintech. Now let's move on to international development and from a more kind of academic study point of view on the behavior side of MSMEs. So Macy, while developing this, dialogue, the Tech for Good Institute actually researched quite extensively on a whole related body of work that could enrich the discussion today. And one recent study that really stood out was the wonderful piece of work about the needs of women called necessity business owners. And I think you guys coined this term to refer to the individuals who start a business primarily to make ends meet. By the Pulse Lab Jakarta. So I was very enlightened. And congratulations on, this is a fantastic piece. I think everybody should read because actually shockingly, we like to analyze things in terms of numbers and data, but behavior is something that is quite qualitative and unpredictable. I've heard from operators that in Indonesia that people actually would not open bank account, not because they're not allowed to sometimes, but because they feel inferior walking into a bank because they feel like lower beings. I was very shocked when I heard that too, but that is strictly a great example really about what you guys are exploring here. So since you've been personally involved in this study, can you share with us what prompted this very interesting angle of looking at the problem? Please share with us your insights, share with us what's surprising and not surprising, and what motivated you guys to do this piece of work.
Okay, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Macy, and I'm part of United Nations Pulse Lab Jakarta. So we're part of the UN that has the mandate to look at digital innovation and how it can be used to advance inclusivity and also sustainable development. So what prompted us to look at this particular angle of behavior is actually COVID. And when the pandemic started, we realized that some of the people who are going to be most impacted are these necessity business owners, right? So the mom and pop shops, people who have warungs or small stalls in front of their homes, people who cook from home and then sell their food. So these kinds of micro businesses that are very common across Indonesia and Southeast Asia, and due to the isolation basically and the quarantine regulations, they will have issues in cash flows and basically staying afloat. And when we talked to our friends at the UN, we found a similar court with UN Women who is really trying to raise the flag about the shadow pandemic and how disproportionate the impact will be to women small business owners. So we teamed up to do this research. We worked with Statistics Indonesia, who found that actually, you know what, digitalization is really happening during the pandemic. And there are actually more women business owners now who are using digital tools to promote their business compared to men. This was not the trend before the pandemic started, and that was a surprise. Then we also teamed up with Gojek, a big multi-service stack platform in Indonesia, to understand exactly what are the range of strategies that people use when they decided to hop on to a digital platform to stay afloat during the pandemic. What are the hiccups and what's the difference between women and men? And I think some of the findings we found through our survey and qualitative studies would feel very familiar to you. So things like basically, women have fewer coping strategies compared to men, but digitalization is going to help them in staying afloat during the pandemic because it opens up new market opportunities. But what was really surprising for me when we were doing that study with Gojek and UN Women was that actually, when we know that digitalization is not going to be equal, right, for everybody. There are issues around access, around affordability, around digital literacy. But when we look at the data, especially in the qualitative finding, we saw merchants, women, small business owners who are based in Jakarta or other big cities in Indonesia who are already using smartphones like WhatsApp, Facebook for their day-to-day communication. They're still very hesitant to use them in order to really push their businesses. And so we wonder why. Other than affordability or infrastructure issues, there must be something else that's behind it. And that's why we decided to take a deep dive and go back to our data, especially the qualitative ones, and try to unpack what there is. And Lynn, I don't think you'll be surprised. A lot of it has to do with the messiness of human emotions and psychology, right? Related to how people interact with technology. So we use the term sticky floors to illustrate what we mean, because basically sticky floors is the behavioral barriers that are holding people back from getting more advanced in exploring and using digital tools to advance their businesses among these necessity business owners. We found different kinds of archetypes or typologies to show how this works. So for instance, we have an archetype that we call the tech anxious, in which the main issue is very similar to what Lynn was sharing with the truckers in Vietnam. It's all about trust to the digital tools and the digital systems. They have heard about fraud that's happening to their neighbors, even though it's not exactly related to a particular tool that they want to use, it is still a big enough risk that makes them stuck to the floor of not wanting to actually explore digital tools to advance their business, even when they really need it during the pandemic. Then we also saw the tech novices. So those who are willing to try and adopt some digital tools like being a social seller through WhatsApp or trying to sign up to an e-commerce platform. But the moment they found that it's going to take too much effort, they're going to stop. So they're not going to continue their journey because of too much effort that's going to be required. Then we also found the tech apprentice, those who are more willing to do trial and error. And what really helped them was the presence of tech facilitators. So usually it's younger people in their family who can actually give them the psychological or emotional boost to navigate through the technology so they can use it for their business or for these very alien purposes. So what we realized from doing this study are two things in terms of top-line insights. Firstly, we talk a lot about digital literacy, but I think we should also talk about digital capabilities that takes into account not only skills, but also things like safety, things like trust, things like how do you build confidence, and how can we become more creative in thinking about digital literacy programs or digital upskilling programs by introducing things like behavioral economic principles, or being more creative in these designs to create the more social element or psychological element that builds confidence and trust in using digital technologies, particularly for those who are poor. Secondly, we're very much reminded that when we talk about digitalization, when we talk about development and the crisis, there's a temptation to overlook the bigger picture of what's happening systematically. And what we found through this research is that the main reason why so many women are hesitant or find it difficult to adopt digital technology is the mental load that they have. So during the pandemic, statistics show that women actually spend 3 more times as men in domestic chores, in unpaid care work. Can you imagine the mental load it creates on somebody who has to cook, try to figure out how to use a digital tool, trying to take care of a sick older parent or maybe their children as well. So many things to juggle at the same time. So we don't think it's true that women are less tech savvy, but we do have to think about the condition that creates the mental load and the environment that they are in. And we do need some structural interventions as well, like redistributing care work, all these kinds of messy systemic things. They need to be part of the conversation about digitalization to make sure that no one is left behind. Yeah, so I'll leave it at there for now.
No, that's really a good observation. In fact, coincidentally, today in the US, I watched on TV just a segment also on why in the developed world, women also are behind in a lot of things. And one of the things they said is that even though there are a lot of mentorship efforts now and those programs, unless you're providing significant childcare, home care, cost subsidies to help with these, like you said, mind space taking home chores, there is a huge barrier still to allow women to have the same level of access and headspace and time to do the same kind of business and work. So thank you so much. That's a separate panel that we will definitely plan one day on exploring this issue, but the study is very, very valuable. Why don't we gather the whole panel, because we explored a little bit on your field, your individual viewpoints. Why don't we look at also the role of policy, because that is really important in this region, both at the local level and regional level, right? The role of public-private partnership and how can that contribute to making the environment more enabling for MSMEs to support them to thrive. So I would love to hear your views on how you think, from your vantage point, from what you're doing, how can the public sector and private sector find a better way? You can give an example, or you can just give an idea of how they can work better to help the MSME community. Why don't we start with Kel-J this time, and then Macy, Lynn, and then Agna.
Sure. Thanks, Laria. You know, one of our missions in GFG is to bring financial inclusion to many Southeast Asians, and this is a massive effort, right? And it can't be done by any single entity, private or public. And therefore, what we have seen is that the best outcomes do come from partnerships. And Grab has done some of these partnerships, and I'll just share a few examples here. In Indonesia, for example, we work with the Ministry of Cooperative and SMEs, whereby we help over 200,000 small businesses go online. And we're able to do that with services such as Grab Food, Grab Mart, Grab Kiosks, depending on the sector that they're in. And once they're online, we help them to also promote their online business to our customers. Now, another example is in the Philippines, whereby we work with the Department of Agriculture to enable farmers, or what the locals like to call agripreneurs, to sell directly to consumers across Metro Manila. And the part that we play is to do the fulfillment with our Grab Express service. Now, closer to home in Singapore, we participated in an initiative called the Heartlands Go Digital. This is more of an education piece whereby we help the smaller businesses, the mom and pop shops in the heartlands, to go online, to educate them, to educate them on the benefits of cashless payments, digital finance, and then we also help them on board onto GrabPay with very, very preferential rates. And then lastly, and more broadly, most of the countries and governments in Southeast Asia is rolling out their own version of a national QR payment scheme. So whether it's Singapore, SGQR in Singapore, or Do It Now in Malaysia, or PHQR in Philippines, as a leading fintech player in the region, we are also supportive of all these initiatives. So these are some examples, and but having said that, I think a lot more can be done. Things in the areas of financial literacy, I think that's a lot more work can be done there. In terms of co-developing regulatory frameworks, particularly in the area of responsible use of data, something that I think more can be done. And we're also particularly interested in helping with financial inclusion, driving financial inclusion using emerging technology like blockchain. Yeah, so a lot more to be done.
Looking forward to see all the new products too and innovation. Thank you, KLJ. Macy?
Sure. So again, because my interest is in inclusive and equitable development, then of course the role of policy would be to make sure that infrastructure can be more equal. There are programs of education that really looks at digital capabilities and not only literacy or upskilling, as I mentioned before. And in this area, actually, there will be a lot of opportunity to partner with the private sector. So after we've done this study, we've shared it a lot with our counterparts like Gojek, for instance, or Amarta, the microlending company that Akne also mentioned when she gave her introduction earlier. They're very interested in taking some of these principles and also applying them in their capacity building programs that they do for their merchants or their customers. So there's a lot of area that can be done through private partnership right there. And although you mentioned, Ilaria, that this could be a separate panel in itself, I do think that policy has a lot of role in actually thinking about the care economy and how to redistribute care work. So care economy is also an emerging industry that's developing quite a bit and increasing in urgency, especially during the pandemic. And there's a lot that the government can think about. For instance, long-term care services, especially for the elderly, since we are an aging population and there will be way more older people in the world than ever before in the next few years. So these kinds of societal policy that underlies basically a lot of the governance and the way things work will matter to support how MSME can grow in the future in a more equitable way.
That's really good. Thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, I think just follow up on the previous insights about how fragmented the market is, not just taking into account the trucking industry, but other industries as well. I think on a broader level like that, many micro enterprises and SMEs struggle with the reliability and the credit worthiness of new partners and new clients. It is difficult to get a new client already, but getting them to pay on time, to pay as promised, is even harder. So pre-COVID and even more so during the pandemic, because a lot of MSMEs struggle to pay their invoices on time due to cash flow issues. So the market really doesn't have a centralized body or authority to oversee and carry out escrow services for buyers and sellers, nor do we have a rating system that tells an SME that this company, this partner is going to pay them on time. And so in terms of the partnerships between private and people sectors, I think it is crucially important to link the credit systems together between the private information and the with the government. So just taking an example is that in China, there's a trucking company called Full Truck Alliance that is listed on NASDAQ. And Full Truck Alliance has over 20 million truckers on their platform, and they have successfully connected their trucker wallets with the electronic toll cards issued by the government, also called ETCs. So by connecting these trucker wallets with ETCs, the government can issue out more and more electronic toll cards to more and more truckers in the country and help increase the digital transformation in this space, and also helps Full Truck Alliance with the credit worthiness rating of the truckers, because if the trucker default on their payments, then it is linked to how the truck is moved through the national highway. And so the default rate of truckers is actually very low in China for Full Truck Alliance. And so I think this is a very interesting observation, that something similar in other space, in other industries in Southeast Asia we could do to partner at the system level between government and between private sector to help increase the credit worthiness of reliable partners, clients, and so help the MSMEs to grow faster.
And how, I mean, obviously just as estimate, how far out do you think Vietnam government is from this scenario of creating something like this, do you think?
You mean the electronic toll cards connection?
Yeah, or a
the
centralized
wallets?
system to allow this level of creditworthiness to emulate what you just described in China. Do you think it's something that we will see in near future?
Yeah, definitely in the near future, because right now the Vietnamese government has rolled out the electronic systems for public services, and also for electronic toll cards are being developed as well as being rolled out in certain provinces of Vietnam as pilots. So I think this is something very feasible, as Vietnam is a very pro-digital transformation country. And we have a lot of the digital hubs here. We are particularly big in crypto space as well. So there's a lot of blockchain tech startups hubs in Vietnam.
Great, thank you for sharing those insights, Lynn. Last but not least, Agna.
Thank you, Laria. So one thing that really sort of corresponded with me when I was listening to Macy is the need to gain trust in technology, and therefore focus on digital skills, building the digital skills in the region. And this is where we believe also there's a really big importance of public and private partnerships and collaboration between the governments and the private sector. We really believe that, to unlock that whole digital potential in the region, we need to work massively at bridging the gap of lack of skills. And in fact, in 2021, we did a study together with Alpha Beta where we looked at various digital skills needs in APAC region. And one of the most important ones that came up was cloud computing and data skills, which according to Alpha Beta is meant to triple by 2025, which basically is the largest gap if you look at all the digital skills. So we are really deeply invested to work with governments on various education programs and training programs that can help to bridge that digital skills gap. And we've got a lot of really interesting programs on that. So Skills Builder, which is basically a learning experience that provides free digital skills trainings, AWS Educate, which basically gives a lot of training courses that people can plug into, or AWS Academy, that basically works with education institutions to prepare students for careers in the cloud. And one of such specific examples I wanted to mention, it's our work in Indonesia with the Ministry of Education and Culture, part of the Merdeka Belajar program, where basically we're working to revise the curriculums in 5 leading universities in Indonesia to include content on computer science, covering the cloud computing and related technologies for students. So that's just an example of that. And maybe a little bit broader when we move towards the policy, right? Because really it's my main bread and butter of what I do, working with various policymakers to help shape the policy frameworks. And so working with those, I would say the examples of sort of the best practice policy frameworks that we have seen in the region are the ones, and in particular, the ones that are supporting micro, small and medium enterprise digitalization and cloud native business models. So specifically, it is the policies that are promoting cloud or removing the barriers to migrate to the cloud. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I work a lot with regulated industries. And it's extremely, we hear that so often from our customers, from financial services, from the telecoms, or from healthcare industry, saying, we don't really know if regulators allow us to migrate to the cloud and launch our workloads in the cloud. So having those clear policies supporting that is super important. Pushing for risk-based approaches, not making those policies too prescriptive. It's extremely difficult to follow compliance obligations when policies are too prescriptive. And when it comes to public sector, and that's specifically for healthcare industry, we've seen the best practice follows really when the governments adopt the cloud first or cloud native policies, which basically means that for public sector enterprises, unless there is a strong reason not to do so, government institutions should look at cloud when they procure their IT systems. And what is important there then is having really good data classification, data management policies, and procurement policies as well. So those statements as such do not really work unless you have the whole framework behind. This is where we saw like the massive, the most successful digital transformation. And I guess last but not least, and it was mentioned by IMDA, is the supporting the cross-border data flows. The technology and the cloud has benefited the communities because of its ability to operate cross borders. The effective and efficient functioning of data processing cross borders is really a fundamental building block for us for any data value chain. So it really is important that policies do not block these cross-border data transfers and thus allow for ability to benefit from the technology.
I hear you. No, thank you. And I think in an ideal world that we will be in a more welcoming environment for more globalization and collaborative efforts. Let's hope and have our fingers crossed that we can really head there. Because cross-border data flow really can help standardize too and increase trustworthiness, as we were talking about, to pull together more data. We have time now for 2 questions that came from the audience, and then we can wrap our session. So very quickly, we have one for KelJ first. So we have a question on, I'm curious on the repayment rate of the merchants who have availed of the loans.
Sure, I'm happy to take that. You know, we being in this space whereby we are offering loans to our customers, whether it's consumers or small businesses, we are very aware of the risks of this business, and therefore we don't actually extend loans to everyone. We are quite selective as to who we extend loans to based on the historical transactions that they have made on the platform. And therefore, we mitigate the risk that way. Now, the other thing is we'll also limit the amount of loans that we provide to our merchants based on the amount of income that we see on the platform. So they're never overextended. And from a collections basis, I mentioned earlier, we actually automatically collect their repayments by deducting from their incomes on a daily basis. So it's small amounts that they can afford to repay. So with all that in place, I mean, I can't specifically share what the repayment rates are, but what I can say is that the loan impairment, so that's a metric that we track very closely in terms of our risk metric. It is well within the thresholds.
No, thank you, KelJ. The next question, actually, we can post to everybody in the panel. The question says, could digital inclusivity offering economic benefits for participants strengthen the MSMEs? Anyone want to have a go first?
So maybe quickly from the cloud perspective, absolutely. We have seen micro, small, and medium enterprises themselves, when they become digitally transformed, when they, for example, become cloud native, right? It's absolutely incredible the things they can do, and they can disrupt industries that have been really there for years, without being digitally disrupted. So this is amazing. And that, of course, in itself, then they themselves create the services and products and solutions to these underserved minorities and underrepresented minorities. So we definitely are big believers that such digital transformation can bridge the digital divide and help with digital inclusion, with financial inclusion at various industries and levels.
Thank you. Any other panelists want to have a go?
Yeah, I'll jump on that as well. So by digital inclusivity, I think what we mean is that everybody, regardless of their background, their geographical location, their gender, their abilities, they have access to digital technologies, and they understand how to use them in a way that is safe and can be beneficial for them. I think having that as a standard for the society is fantastic for the MSME sector and beyond. And why is that? Not only for the reasons that Agne also mentioned, but it's also because everybody can be innovators, right? If they understand what these digital tools can actually do for them. So during COVID, for instance, we see a lot of innovation that are coming from the grassroots to solve their own problems. What amazes me about the Southeast Asia region is that this kind of local innovations during hardships, during hard times really emerges, and it shows how people are, within their limited means, are innovating to solve their own problems. So I can only imagine all the disruption and the possibilities that can happen if access to digital technologies and capabilities are more equal across society.
Thank you. Lynn, do you have any comment? If not, we'll move on to our final lightning round.
I have no comments.
Sure. So the final lightning round, very quickly, is for everybody on the panel. Please tell us, just share with us what gets you most excited about Southeast Asia right now, especially relating to the future for MSMEs. Why don't we start with Lynn, Kel-J, Macy, then Agda.
So I think what is being the most interesting for us to tackle this space to offer more better economic opportunities for the MSME trucking companies and truckers in Vietnam is that we are tackling very large population, but are also underserved and often neglected from the financing point of view. As mentioned before, they lack access to financing services in order to grow their fleets, as well as access to tools, platforms to gain better jobs, better shipments for their business. And so what is really exciting about this is that we are tapping into helping a large population to grow. And this is the backbone of the economy as well, because without logistics, without the trucking market, then no services or products could be delivered. And we are very proud to work in this sector.
Great. Kel-J?
Yeah, we've seen actually lots of progress in this front with regards to adoption of digital finance and technology, especially during COVID, out of necessity, out of needing to survive. But still, a lot more to be done. We know, 6 in 10 in Southeast Asia are underbanked, 9 in 10 has no access to credit. Many of whom are actually our driver partners and delivery partners and merchant partners already on the platform. So we're really just scratching the surface here, and with our mission of bringing financial inclusion to this group of customers. There's just a lot more that needs to be done. As I say, we can't do it alone, and we welcome partners, both public and private, to go on this journey with us.
Lovely. Thank you. Macy?
Yeah, as I said before, I'm interested in the wealth of innovation that happens in the region. And I'm especially heartened to see a lot of businesses in the MSME sector that have come up that wants to address issues like the care economy and how to do that better and how to provide more equitable care services for the society. So companies that are more tapping into circular economy to make sure that we're not providing more adverse impact to the climate, considering that we're already in a climate crisis. So these kinds of innovation is what's coming up from the region, and I'm really excited to see what's more to come.
Thank you. And finally, Agna.
Thank you. So we are definitely very excited about that, fostering that culture of innovation that we have seen in the region. And we are definitely more than happy to be working with various enterprises and of different sizes and to really help them improve the access to IT resources, to the technology, to support the local small businesses and startups, to improve the customer experience, but also focus on digital inclusions, to better serve the unrepresented groups in our region. We're definitely just scratching the surface. I totally agree, but I think we are on a pathway just to some amazing things. It's not just that; it's also that disruption that the MSMEs brought into the picture. So very excited to looking at the future.
I couldn't agree more. And with that, we're closing this wonderful panel. And one thing that I keep hearing over and over again from the panel is a deep sense of social responsibility and purpose. No wonder you guys can keep fighting the good fight in a pretty tough field, actually, because you're constantly innovating something and treading a field that the trail hasn't been blazed yet, and you guys are creating that. So keep fighting the good fight for the MSME population and create innovative and prosperous businesses that can nation build. We're rooting for you. Now, last but not least, as we close today's session, we're so privileged to have Mr. Ozir Khan to close for us today with his remarks. Ozir Khan is the director of the Office of Digital Innovation and Architecture Division within the Asian Development Bank. He's currently also heading the ADB Digital Innovation Sandbox Program. He has worked for the United Nations and the global financial banking services sector in Asia, Europe, and the USA. And prior to joining the ADB, he was the Chief of Innovation and Business Relationships at the UN headquarters in New York. He has very broad areas of expertise, including digital transformation, innovation, emerging tech, adoption by public sector and international agencies. So over to you, Mr. Khan.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining this session. I think this is one of the areas which are close, sort of dear to my heart in terms of small enterprises and startups. I'm a technologist and have been for the last 20, 30 years. I have seen industries change. I have seen countries change. Development on the back of tech has been sort of a norm in the last 30, 40 years. When I look at the previous century, I look at big businesses as sort of being the mantra, how to become big and global. And I feel that this century and where we are today, it's about innovation, it's about startups, it's about how small businesses can pivot things, make a difference. I'm seeing trends, especially looking at the challenges that we face today, what we were discussing earlier, climate change challenges even on the current scenarios in the market around inflation, around issues that we deal with in terms of supply chain and so on and so forth. The list goes on. And how do you address them? They come from innovation, and large companies, to bring innovation from an enterprise perspective on a global basis, it is tough. A lot of the changes, they really happen in small businesses. They come from medium-sized businesses, and today it's very much we're at the convergence of many different types of technologies which are coming together. We talked about cloud computing, to AI, to others, and they're finally making sort of a different shift today with Web 3.0 and others, where the opportunities for these small and medium-sized businesses are tremendous. And one of the things when I have my discussion with startups and small and medium companies, we talk about how much should a small business spend on digital? They spend so much money on Facebook ads for sales, and cost of goods, so on and so forth. But what should be the amount they should spend on digital if you're a small enterprise? How much should the focus be on digital? And that's some of the things that we are seeing a change in. And I think that this is where the investment community, as it's pivoting in terms of more funds availability for startups and private equity for small and medium-sized businesses, is going to be looking at digital and is going to be looking at unlocking the value coming from digital. The small and medium enterprise, especially in Southeast Asia, I mean, if you look around, we see a lot of ambition. To make that ambition into reality requires action and risk taking and experimenting with new technologies in small and medium-sized enterprises. And for institutions like ADB and others, development institutions, we need to figure out how to support that. How to support that, not just financially, but beyond that, how to become partners. So yes, this is an interesting area to watch. I think our post-COVID life is going to be designed not by the best practices of sort of large enterprises, but sort of the next practices which are being built by smaller organizations. So with that, I will end with that. Thank you so much, and thank you for attending the session.